The crystal chandelier above cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as 10-year-old Ruby stood frozen in the grand hallway, her worn sneakers leaving faint dust marks on the gleaming white tiles. Her small hand trembled as she pointed toward the ornate gold frame hanging on the wall, her voice barely a whisper yet cutting through the silence like a knife. "Why is my mom's photo in your mansion?" The billionaire, Jonathan Pierce, turned slowly from where he stood near the sweeping staircase, his tailored suit catching the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His steel-gray eyes followed the direction of her trembling finger, and for the first time in his carefully controlled life, the color drained completely from his face. The expensive crystal glass he'd been holding slipped from his fingers, shattering into 1,000 pieces on the floor, but he didn't even flinch at the sound. He just stared at the photograph, then at the little girl with tangled brown hair and a faded pink jacket, then back at the photograph again, his mouth opening and closing like he'd forgotten how to form words. The woman in that photograph wore a white sundress and had the brightest smile Jonathan had ever seen, her dark hair flowing in an invisible breeze, her eyes sparkling with joy. That photograph had hung in his private study for over 11 years, a reminder of the only woman he'd ever truly loved, the woman he'd mourned every single day since her tragic death. But how could this poor child, this girl selling homemade candies door to door in the wealthiest neighborhood in the city, possibly know who that woman was? Before we continue with this shocking discovery, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from right now. Are you Team Ruby or Team Jonathan? Let us know below, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our stories. Now, let me take you back to where this extraordinary day began just 6 hours earlier, when Ruby had no idea her entire world was about to change forever. The morning sun had barely risen over the city when Ruby carefully arranged 20 small paper bags on the rickety kitchen table in their tiny apartment. Each bag contained 5 pieces of homemade candy that she and her grandmother Margaret had spent all week making. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms with peeling paint and a bathroom where the faucet dripped constantly no matter how tight you turned it. The furniture was old and mismatched, collected from thrift stores and sidewalk giveaways over the years, but Margaret kept everything spotlessly clean and filled the space with as much love as she could muster. Ruby's mother, Claire, lay sleeping in the corner bed, her breathing shallow and labored even in rest. She'd been sick for 3 years now, getting weaker with each passing month, and the medical bills had piled up so high that they'd long ago stopped opening the envelopes that came in the mail. The doctors said she needed surgery, expensive surgery that cost more money than Ruby could even imagine. And without it, well, the doctors never finished that sentence, but Ruby understood what they meant from the sad looks in their eyes. "Graham, I'm going to sell all 20 bags today," Ruby announced with determination, carefully placing each bag into her worn backpack. "That's $100 if I can sell them for $5 each." Margaret looked up from where she was washing dishes in the sink, her wrinkled hands moving slowly through the soapy water. She was 72 years old but looked much older, her back bent from years of hard work, her gray hair pulled back in a simple bun. She'd raised Claire alone after Ruby's grandfather died, and now she was helping raise Ruby while Claire fought her illness. Life had not been easy on Margaret, but she never complained, never showed bitterness about the hard cards she'd been dealt. "Baby girl, those rich neighborhoods make me nervous," Margaret said softly, drying her hands on a faded dish towel. "Those people up on Millionaire's Row, they don't always treat folks like us with kindness. Maybe you should stick to our neighborhood today." Ruby shook her head, her brown ponytail swinging with determination. "The people in our neighborhood don't have money for candy, Graham, you know that. Mrs. Chen bought 3 bags last week because she felt sorry for us, not because she wanted the candy. I saw her give them to her dog. We need real customers, people who can actually afford $5 and won't miss it." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. It broke her heart that this child, this sweet 10-year-old girl who should be worried about homework and friends and what to wear to school, was instead carrying the weight of their family's survival on her small shoulders. Ruby had stopped going to school 2 months ago because they couldn't afford supplies, and her 1 pair of shoes had holes in the bottom. Margaret had tried to stop her, had argued and pleaded, but Ruby was stubborn, so much like her mother had been at that age. "At least take this," Margaret said, pressing a worn $5 bill into Ruby's hand. "For the bus fare up the hill and back, and maybe a small snack if you get hungry. Don't you dare try to bring this money back to me, you hear? A growing girl needs to eat." Ruby hugged her grandmother tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender soap and vanilla that always clung to Margaret's clothes. I love you, Graham. Tell Mom I love her too when she wakes up. I'll be home before dark, I promise. The bus ride up to Millionaire's Row took 40 minutes and required 2 transfers. Ruby sat quietly in the back, clutching her backpack and watching the city change outside the window. The buildings got taller and cleaner, the cars got shinier and more expensive, the people on the sidewalks wore clothes that probably cost more than a month's rent in Ruby's apartment. By the time the bus reached the top of the hill, Ruby felt like she'd traveled to a completely different world. A world where lawns stretched on forever and houses looked more like castles than places where normal people lived. She got off at the last stop and began walking down Evergreen Avenue, the most exclusive street in the entire city. Each house sat behind tall iron gates with security cameras and intercom systems. Some had actual guardhouses where uniformed men sat watching monitors. Ruby's worn sneakers crunched on the perfectly maintained sidewalk, and she could feel eyes watching her from behind those gates, suspicious eyes wondering what a poor girl in a faded jacket was doing in their neighborhood. The first 5 houses rejected her before she even finished her pitch. Some ignored the intercom completely when they saw her through their security cameras. One woman's voice crackled through the speaker saying, "We don't buy from solicitors." Before the intercom went dead, a man in a black suit who looked like he worked security actually came out to the gate and told her she needed a permit to sell things in this neighborhood, and if she didn't leave immediately, he'd call the police. Ruby's confidence began to crumble with each rejection, but she thought about her mother's labored breathing, about the medical bills stacked on their kitchen counter, about her grandmother's tired eyes, and she kept walking. She would not give up. She could not give up. Giving up meant accepting that her mother might not get better, and Ruby refused to accept that reality. The 6th house had a slightly smaller gate than the others, and the call button looked worn from use, like actual human hands pressed it regularly instead of it being just for show. Ruby took a deep breath, smoothed down her jacket, and pressed the button. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then a kind voice came through the speaker, older, female, with a slight accent Ruby couldn't quite place. "Yes, hello." Hello, ma'am," Ruby said, standing on her tiptoes to speak clearly into the intercom. "My name is Ruby, and I'm selling homemade candies to help pay for my mom's medical bills. They're really good candies made with real ingredients, $5 per bag. Would you be interested in buying some?" There was a pause, then the voice said, "Oh my dear, wait right there, I'll be down in just a moment." Ruby waited, her heart pounding with hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be her first real sale of the day. A few minutes later, an older woman with silver hair and a warm smile appeared walking down the long driveway. She was dressed simply but elegantly, wearing a soft blue sweater and black pants, and she moved slowly like her knees hurt with each step. "Let me see what you have, sweetheart," the woman said, her eyes crinkling with genuine kindness. Ruby opened her backpack with trembling hands and pulled out 3 bags of candy. The woman examined them carefully, reading the little labels Ruby had written in her neatest handwriting. "Peanut butter chocolate drops, vanilla caramels, and honey lemon chews. These look wonderful, dear. Did you make these yourself?" "My Graham and I made them together," Ruby explained, her words tumbling out faster now with excitement. "We use her old recipes from when she was young. No artificial stuff, just real sugar and real butter and real flavors. My mom used to help too before she got sick." The woman's expression softened with sympathy. "I'll take all 3 bags," she said, pulling out a $20 bill from her pocket. "And you keep the change, all right? Consider it a tip for such wonderful candy and such a brave young salesgirl." Ruby's eyes went wide. "Ma'am, I can't take $15 extra. That wouldn't be right. 3 bags is $15 total, so I owe you $5 change." The woman shook her head firmly. "You listen to me, young lady. Anyone who works as hard as you're working deserves to be rewarded properly. Now you take that money and you buy yourself something nice or put it toward those medical bills, whichever you choose. And here," she reached into her other pocket and pulled out a business card. "This is the address for my church. We have a food pantry that's open every Tuesday and Thursday. You tell them Mrs. Patterson sent you and they'll make sure your family has groceries. No shame in accepting help when you need it, you understand." Ruby felt tears burning in her eyes as she took the money and the card. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Patterson. You don't know how much this means." Mrs. Patterson patted Ruby's cheek gently. "You're a good girl, Ruby. Your mother is lucky to have such a caring daughter. Now you be safe out here, all right? Not everyone in this neighborhood is as friendly as me." Ruby left that house feeling like she was walking on air. $20 from just 3 bags. If she could sell the rest at that rate, she'd have over $100 by the end of the day. Maybe they could finally pay some of those medical bills. Maybe the doctors would agree to do the surgery if they showed they were trying to pay. She tried 6 more houses with mixed results. 2 didn't answer. 3 told her no through the intercom without even looking at what she was selling. But one man, a retired lawyer named Mr. Chen, bought 4 bags and gave her exact change, which was perfectly fine with Ruby. Every sale counted. By early afternoon, Ruby had sold 12 of her 20 bags and had $75 in her pocket. She was tired, hungry, and her feet hurt from all the walking, but she felt proud. She'd done it. She'd actually made a real difference today, but she wanted to sell the remaining 8 bags before heading home. Every single dollar mattered. That's when she found herself standing in front of the biggest, most beautiful mansion she'd ever seen in her entire life. It sat at the end of a private cul-de-sac, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens that looked like something from a fairy tale. The gate was tall and made of wrought iron with golden details, and through the bars, Ruby could see a fountain in the circular driveway, water sparkling in the sunlight like liquid diamonds. The house itself was 3 stories of white stone with huge windows and balconies, columns that reached all the way to the roof, and flower boxes overflowing with colorful blooms she couldn't even name. Ruby almost turned around. This place was too fancy, too intimidating. Whoever lived here probably wouldn't even talk to someone like her. But then she remembered her mother's face, pale and drawn with pain even in sleep, and she straightened her shoulders. She'd come this far, she had to at least try. She pressed the intercom button and waited, expecting nothing. But then a man's voice came through, deep and tired sounding. "Yes." "Hello, sir," Ruby began, launching into her practiced speech. "My name is Ruby and I'm selling homemade candies to help pay for my mom's medical treatment. Would you be interested in buying some? They're $5 a bag and they're really good. We make them ourselves." There was a long pause. Ruby thought maybe he'd walked away from the intercom without answering, which had happened at several other houses. But then the voice came back, sounding slightly less tired, maybe even a little curious. "How old are you?" The question surprised Ruby. "I'm 10, sir, almost 11. Another pause. "And you're out here selling candy by yourself?" "Yes, sir, my gram knows where I am. I'm being safe, I promise." "What's wrong with your mother?" Ruby hesitated. Most people didn't ask questions, they either bought or they didn't. "She has something wrong with her heart, sir. The doctors say she needs surgery, but it costs a lot of money and we don't have insurance anymore because the bills got too high." The silence stretched so long this time that Ruby was sure he'd left. She was about to turn and walk away when suddenly, the massive gate began to swing open with a quiet mechanical hum. "Come up to the house," the voice said through the intercom. "I'll buy your candy." Ruby's heart leaped with excitement and just a tiny bit of fear. She'd never actually been invited inside one of these estates before. Everyone else had either bought at the gate or through the intercom. But the man sounded kind, and Mrs. Patterson had been right about good people existing in this neighborhood. She adjusted her backpack and walked through the gate, which closed automatically behind her with a soft click that made her jump. The walk up the driveway seemed to take forever. Up close, the mansion was even more impressive, each window probably bigger than Ruby's entire bedroom. The fountain in the center of the circular drive had stone angels pouring water from urns, and the water sparkled so clean and clear that Ruby could see colorful fish swimming at the bottom. Real fish living in a fountain, because why not when you had this much money? Ruby climbed the wide stone steps to the front door, which was made of dark wood with iron fixtures that looked like they belonged in a medieval castle. Before she could knock, the door swung open and there stood the man from the intercom. Jonathan Pierce was tall, maybe in his late 30s, with dark hair that had just a touch of gray at the temples and sharp features that might have been handsome if they didn't look so tired and sad. He wore an expensive suit, even though he was home alone in the middle of the afternoon, and his eyes had the kind of exhaustion that came from years of not sleeping well rather than just one bad night. He looked down at Ruby with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between surprise and pain and curiosity all mixed together. "So you're Ruby," he said, his voice softer in person than it had been through the intercom. "Come in, let's see what you're selling." Ruby stepped into the mansion and immediately felt like she'd walked into a museum. Everything was expensive and beautiful and perfect. The floor was white marble with gold veining running through it like rivers. The ceiling soared 2 stories high with that crystal chandelier hanging down like frozen waterfall. Paintings in gold frames lined the walls, and furniture that looked too fancy to actually sit on was arranged in perfect groupings throughout the massive entryway. But what caught Ruby's attention, what made her stop walking and stop breathing and stop thinking about anything else in the entire world, was the photograph hanging on the wall at the base of the grand staircase. It was her mother. Not someone who looked like her mother, not a woman who resembled her mother. It was actually, definitely, 100% her mother, looking younger and healthier than Ruby had seen her in years, wearing a white sundress Ruby had never seen before, smiling that beautiful smile that rarely appeared anymore because of the constant pain. Ruby's backpack slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor with a soft thud. Her mouth fell open. Her hands began to shake. Nothing in her entire life had prepared her for this moment, for seeing her mother's face in a stranger's mansion, framed in gold like she was someone important, someone treasured, someone who belonged in this world of marble floors and crystal chandeliers. "Why is my mom's photo in your mansion?" The words came out as barely a whisper, but they seemed to echo off the high ceiling, filling the enormous space with the weight of the question. Behind her, Ruby heard the crystal glass slip from Jonathan's hand and shatter on the floor. She turned to look at him and saw his face had gone completely white, his eyes locked on the photograph like he was seeing a ghost. "What did you say?" His voice was hoarse, shaking. "That woman in the photograph, you said she's your mother." Ruby nodded, unable to form more words. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, and her mind was racing with 1,000 questions. Why did this stranger have her mother's picture? How did he know her mother? When was this photo taken? Why did her mother look so happy in it, happier than Ruby had ever seen her in real life? Jonathan moved toward the photograph like a man in a trance, his expensive shoes crunching over the broken glass without him seeming to notice or care. He stood in front of the frame, his hand reaching up to touch the glass, his fingers trembling. "Claire," he whispered, and the name came out like a prayer, like a sob, like something torn from deep in his chest. "Her name is Claire Davis. She died 11 years ago in a car accident. The police found her car at the bottom of Riverside Canyon. There was a fire. They said she didn't suffer, that it happened instantly." Ruby's legs suddenly felt weak. She grabbed onto a nearby table to steady herself. "No," she said firmly, her voice stronger now. "No, my mom isn't dead. Her name is Claire, you got that part right, but her last name is Foster and she's alive. She's sick, really sick, but she's alive. She's at home right now sleeping in our apartment." Jonathan spun around to face her, and Ruby took a step back at the intensity in his eyes. They were wild now, desperate, searching her face like he was looking for something specific. "How old are you?" he demanded. "You said 10, almost 11. When's your birthday?" "February 14th, Ruby answered, confused by the question. "Valentine's Day. My mom always says I was her greatest gift." Jonathan did the math in his head, counting backwards, and Ruby watched as his face cycled through emotions too fast for her to identify. Shock, hope, denial, anger, confusion, and then something that looked almost like wonder. 11 years ago, he said slowly, as if working through a difficult puzzle. "Claire disappeared 11 years ago in March. If you're almost 11 and were born in February, that means..." He stopped, his mouth opening and closing as the implications hit him. "That means she was already pregnant when she disappeared. She was pregnant when she supposedly died." Ruby's head was spinning. None of this made any sense. "I don't understand. How do you know my mom? Why do you have her picture? And why did you think she was dead?" Instead of answering, Jonathan walked to a door off the main hallway and disappeared inside what looked like an office or study. Ruby heard drawers opening and closing, papers rustling, and then Jonathan emerged carrying a small wooden box, the kind that might hold jewelry or precious keepsakes. He sat down on the bottom step of the staircase, not seeming to care that his expensive suit was touching the floor, and opened the box with shaking hands. Inside were letters, dozens of them, yellowed with age, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. He pulled one out and unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the page before he looked up at Ruby with tears streaming down his face. "I was engaged to your mother," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "We were supposed to get married. I loved her more than anything in this world. And then one day she just vanished. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. The police found her car wrecked at the bottom of a canyon 2 weeks later. They found her purse, her identification, even her engagement ring in the wreckage. Everyone said she must have died, that her body was probably thrown from the car and washed away by the river. We had a funeral even though there was no body to bury. I've mourned her every single day for 11 years. He stood up suddenly, moving toward Ruby with such intensity that she took another step back, bumping into the table behind her. But Jonathan stopped a few feet away, his eyes scanning her face with desperate attention to every detail. "You have her eyes," he whispered. "Exactly her eyes, the same shade of brown with those little gold flecks that catch the light, and your chin, that's her chin, the way you tilt your head when you're confused, she used to do that exact same thing." Ruby's mind was reeling. This man, this billionaire in his fancy mansion, was saying he'd been engaged to her mother. But that couldn't be right. Ruby's father had been a man named David Foster, a man who died before Ruby was born. At least that's what her mother had always told her. The few times Ruby had asked about her father, Claire had said he was a good man who loved them but had died in an accident, and talking about him made her too sad, so they didn't discuss it. Ruby had learned to stop asking. But now, looking at this man's face, seeing the genuine grief and shock and desperate hope in his eyes, Ruby felt the foundations of everything she'd believed beginning to crack. "I need you to take me to her," Jonathan said urgently. "Right now, I need to see Claire. I need to know if this is real, if she's really alive." "I don't know you," Ruby said, her voice small and scared now. "My mom never mentioned anyone named Jonathan. She never told me anything about being engaged or having money or knowing anyone who lived in places like this." Jonathan ran his hands through his hair, making it stand up in all directions, his usual composure completely shattered. "Because she wanted to disappear," he said, his voice filled with realization. "She wanted me to think she was dead. But why? Why would she do that? We were happy. We were planning a life together. I would have given her anything, everything. What could have possibly made her run away and let me think she was dead for 11 years? He looked at Ruby again, really looked at her, and asked the question that was burning in both of their minds. "Ruby, who is your father?" Ruby opened her mouth to say David Foster, to repeat the name she'd been told her whole life, but the words wouldn't come. Because now, standing in this mansion, looking at this man who had her mother's photograph framed in gold, who had letters tied with ribbons, who was looking at her with such desperate intensity, she realized she didn't actually know anything about David Foster. She'd never seen pictures of him. Her mother had no photos displayed, no mementos, nothing to prove he'd ever existed at all. "I don't know," Ruby whispered, and saying those words out loud made her feel like the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. "I thought I knew, but now I don't know anything anymore." Jonathan and Ruby stood in that massive hallway, surrounded by wealth and beauty and all the trappings of success, but none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the photograph on the wall and the impossible possibility it represented. That somewhere in this city, in a tiny apartment with peeling paint and medical bills stacked on the counter, was a woman who was supposed to be dead but wasn't. A woman who'd disappeared without explanation 11 years ago. A woman who'd kept secrets that were now starting to unravel, thread by thread, with each passing second. And somewhere in the space between Jonathan's desperate hope and Ruby's confused fear was a truth that neither of them was ready to face but could no longer avoid. The crystal chandelier above them continued to cast its dancing shadows across the marble floor, indifferent to the world-changing moment happening beneath its light. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward evening, and in an apartment across town, Claire was starting to wake from her restless sleep, not knowing that her carefully constructed walls of protection were about to come crashing down around her. What happened 11 years ago that made Claire disappear? Why did she let Jonathan believe she was dead? And what would happen when these two parts of her life, kept separate for so long, finally collided? The answers were coming, whether anyone was ready for them or not. Jonathan Pierce stood motionless in his grand hallway, his mind racing faster than it had in 11 years. The broken crystal glass on the floor caught the late afternoon light, scattering tiny rainbows across the marble, but he didn't see any of it. All he could see was this child, this girl with tangled brown hair and a faded jacket, who claimed the woman he'd mourned for over a decade was alive. "I need to sit down," Ruby said suddenly, her voice shaky. Her face had gone pale and she swayed slightly on her feet. Jonathan snapped out of his trance immediately. Whatever shock he was experiencing, this child was going through something equally traumatic. He'd spent the last 11 years believing Claire was dead, but Ruby had just discovered that everything she'd been told about her father might be a lie. He moved quickly to her side, gently guiding her to a velvet chair near the wall. "When did you last eat?" he asked, his voice softer now, more controlled. Ruby shrugged, not meeting his eyes. "Graham gave me $5 for a snack, but I saved it. We need the money more than I need food." Something in Jonathan's chest tightened painfully. This child was starving herself to save $5 while he had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. He thought of Claire, the woman who'd once laughed at his wealth and told him that money couldn't buy the things that really mattered, like love and loyalty and peace of mind. If she'd been alive all these years raising their daughter in poverty while he lived in luxury, what did that say about him? What did that say about everything he'd built? "Stay here," Jonathan ordered gently. "Don't move. I'm going to get you something to eat and then we're going to figure this out together." He disappeared into the mansion's depths, leaving Ruby alone in the grand hallway. She sat very still in the chair, her hands gripping the armrests like she might fall if she let go. Her eyes kept drifting back to that photograph of her mother, so young and happy and healthy. Ruby had never seen her mother look like that in real life. For as long as Ruby could remember, Claire had been sick, getting weaker year by year, her face always drawn with pain, her movements always slow and careful like every step hurt. Was this mansion the reason? Had her mother given all this up, given up health and money and happiness to keep Ruby safe from something? But what could be so terrible that living in poverty was better than living here? Jonathan returned carrying a silver tray loaded with food. There were sandwiches cut into triangles, fresh fruit arranged in colorful patterns, cookies that looked homemade, and a tall glass of cold milk. He set it on the table beside Ruby's chair and gestured for her to eat. "I can't afford this," Ruby said quietly, staring at the feast before her. "You're not buying it, I'm giving it to you," Jonathan replied, sitting down in the chair across from her. "Please eat, you need your strength for what comes next." Ruby picked up half a sandwich with trembling hands. It was turkey and cheese on soft white bread, the kind that probably cost $10 at a fancy grocery store. She took a bite and almost cried because it tasted so good, so much better than the government cheese sandwiches she usually ate, and she was so hungry that her stomach hurt. She forced herself to eat slowly to maintain some dignity, but it was hard when all she wanted to do was devour everything on that tray. While Ruby ate, Jonathan opened the wooden box again and began pulling out its contents, spreading them carefully on the floor between their chairs. There were letters, at least 50 of them, all written in his own handwriting but never sent. There were photographs of Claire from before she disappeared, dozens of them showing a vibrant young woman with sparkling eyes and an infectious smile. There was a small velvet box containing an engagement ring, a simple band with a single diamond that Jonathan had saved for months to afford back when he was just starting his business and didn't yet have the billions he'd later accumulate. "I wrote to her even after she died," Jonathan said softly, pulling out one of the letters and unfolding it. "The therapist said it would help me process my grief. Every week for the first year, then every month for the next 2 years, then occasionally after that. I told her about my day, about the business, about how much I missed her. I told her about my mother dying, about how I wished Claire had been there because she would have known what to say to make it hurt less. I told her everything." Ruby swallowed a bite of sandwich and asked the question that had been burning in her mind since she first saw that photograph. "How did you meet my mom?" Jonathan's face softened with the memory, his eyes focusing on something far away and long ago. "I met Claire at a coffee shop downtown. I was 26, just starting my first real business venture, working 18-hour days trying to make it succeed. I was exhausted, running on coffee and ambition, probably looking half dead. She was working there as a barista, going to community college at night, studying to be a teacher. She made my coffee wrong 3 times in 1 week, kept mixing up orders, and I should have been annoyed, but instead I found it charming." He smiled, and it was the first real smile Ruby had seen on his face. "The 4th time I came in, I asked her out. She said no, said she didn't date customers because it was unprofessional. So I stopped going to that coffee shop and started going to the one across the street instead, where I could see her through the window. Every morning for 2 weeks, I'd stand at the window of the other coffee shop, drinking terrible coffee, just to catch a glimpse of her. Finally, she noticed me standing there like an idiot, and she came over during her break and knocked on the window." "What did she say?" Ruby asked, completely absorbed in the story now, her food temporarily forgotten. "She said, 'You're going to get fat drinking coffee from 2 shops every morning, so you might as well go out with me so I can make sure you eat actual food.' We had our first date that night at a tiny Italian restaurant that doesn't exist anymore. We talked for 4 hours straight. She told me about growing up poor, about her mother, your grandmother Margaret, working 3 jobs to keep them afloat. She told me about her dreams of being a teacher, about wanting to help kids who came from backgrounds like hers. She asked about my business, and when I told her I was trying to build something that would change the world, she didn't laugh. Everyone else laughed, but Claire looked at me and said, 'Then you better get to work because the world isn't going to change itself.'" Jonathan's voice caught with emotion, and he had to stop and take a breath before continuing. "We were inseparable after that. She moved in with me 6 months later into a tiny apartment above a laundromat because that's all I could afford then. She didn't care about money or status or any of the things that other women seemed to want from me. She just wanted me, the real me, not the successful version I was trying to become. When my business finally took off and the money started rolling in, she was happy for me, but it didn't change how she felt. She loved me when I had nothing, and she loved me the same when I had everything. So what happened? Ruby asked, leaning forward now. Why did she leave? Jonathan's expression darkened, the happy memories giving way to painful ones. My mother happened. Victoria Pierce was not a kind woman, Ruby. She came from old money, real aristocratic wealth, and she had very specific ideas about who was suitable for her son to marry. When I told her I was engaged to Claire, she was furious. Said Claire was a gold digger, that she was only after my money, that she'd trap me with a baby and ruin my life. Ruby felt anger flare in her chest. My mom isn't like that, she would never. I know, Jonathan interrupted gently. I knew it then too. I defended Claire constantly. I told my mother she was wrong, that Claire was the best thing that ever happened to me. But my mother was relentless. She started showing up at the coffee shop where Claire worked, saying terrible things to her when I wasn't around. She hired private investigators to dig up dirt on Claire's family, on Margaret, trying to find something she could use to prove Claire was unworthy. She even offered Claire money to leave me, a briefcase full of cash and a plane ticket to anywhere in the world if she would just disappear from my life. Did Mom take it? Ruby asked, though something inside her already knew the answer. No, Claire threw the money back at my mother and told her that real love couldn't be bought or sold. She told my mother that she pitied her because someone who saw the world in terms of dollar signs would never understand what true happiness felt like. My mother was not accustomed to being told no, and she definitely wasn't accustomed to being pitied. After that, things got worse. Jonathan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his perfectly manicured gardens, his voice taking on a hollow quality. My mother started sabotaging us in little ways. She'd schedule family dinners on nights she knew Claire and I had plans, then act hurt when I chose Claire over family. She'd show up at our apartment unannounced with her society friends, making subtle digs about the neighborhood and the size of the place, trying to make Claire feel small and inadequate. She spread rumors in our social circle about Claire's background, painted her as someone trying to social climb through me. It was death by 1,000 cuts, and I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until it was too late. He turned back to face Ruby, and there were tears in his eyes now. The last time I saw Claire, we had a huge fight. My mother had told me she was sick, said she had cancer and only had a few months to live. She begged me to break up with Claire, said she couldn't die in peace knowing I was with someone so unsuitable. I told Claire about it, expecting her to be understanding, to help me figure out how to handle the situation. But instead, Claire got very quiet. She asked me if I believed my mother, if I really thought she was dying. I said I didn't know, that my mother was dramatic, but I couldn't risk calling her bluff if it was real. What did Mom say? Ruby whispered. She said, then I guess you have a choice to make. You can choose your mother's approval or you can choose me, but you can't have both. I got angry. I told her she was being unreasonable, that she was asking me to abandon my dying mother. She said she wasn't asking me to abandon anyone, she was asking me to see the truth. That your grandmother Margaret was dying of cancer, not my mother. That my mother was manipulating me, using fake illness to control my life. I didn't believe her. I chose wrong, Ruby. I chose my mother. The words hung in the air like a confession at church, heavy with regret and pain. Jonathan wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand, not caring about the tears streaming down his face. Claire left that night. I thought she just needed space to cool down, that we'd talk in the morning and work it out like we always did. But morning came and she didn't answer her phone. I went to the apartment and she wasn't there. I checked with Margaret, but Margaret said she hadn't seen Claire in days, which I later realized was a lie to protect her daughter. I filed a missing person report. The police searched everywhere. And then 2 weeks later, they found her car at the bottom of Riverside Canyon, burned beyond recognition, with her purse and ID inside. But my mom is alive, Ruby said firmly, so she must have staged it somehow. She must have wanted you to think she died. Yes, Jonathan agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. The question is why? What could have been so bad that faking her own death seemed like the only option? Before Ruby could respond, Jonathan's phone rang. He pulled it from his pocket and glanced at the screen, then his entire body went rigid. He answered the call, his voice suddenly cold and professional. What is it, Gerald? Ruby watched as Jonathan's face cycled through emotions, his free hand clenching into a fist at his side. He was silent for a long moment, just listening, and then he said in a voice that sent chills down Ruby's spine, "Show me the footage." He ended the call and looked at Ruby with an expression she couldn't read. That was my head of security. He's been reviewing the security camera footage from the front gate, standard procedure when we have visitors. He found something interesting from 11 years ago, from the week before Claire's car was found in that canyon. Jonathan pulled out a tablet from a drawer in a nearby console table and tapped at it rapidly, pulling up video files. He found the one he wanted and turned the screen so Ruby could see. The video showed the front gate of this very mansion, the same gate Ruby had walked through just an hour ago. The timestamp in the corner read March 15th, 11 years earlier at 10:47 p.m. On the screen, a figure approached the gate on foot. Even in the grainy night vision footage, Ruby could tell it was a woman, and as she got closer to the camera, her face became visible. It was Claire, looking exactly like she did in that photograph on the wall, but her expression was completely different. She wasn't smiling. She looked terrified, her eyes wide and desperate, and she was carrying something clutched to her chest. She pressed the intercom button frantically, over and over. The video had audio, and they could hear Claire's voice, thin and scared, coming through the speakers. "Jonathan, Jonathan, please, I know you're home, please answer, I need to talk to you, it's important, it's life or death, Jonathan." But on the video, the gate didn't open. The intercom didn't respond. After 5 minutes of Claire pleading and crying and begging for Jonathan to answer, another figure appeared on the screen. This one was an older woman in an expensive coat, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face hard and cold. "Victoria Pierce." "You need to leave," Victoria said on the video, her voice crisp and commanding. "Jonathan is not here, and even if he were, he wouldn't want to see you. You made your choice when you walked away." "Please, Mrs. Pierce," Claire begged on the video, and Ruby felt tears spring to her eyes hearing her mother's voice from so long ago. "I need to tell him something. It's about—" She stopped, looking down at whatever she was holding against her chest, and Ruby realized with a start that it must have been medical records or test results or something else related to her pregnancy. "About what?" Victoria demanded. "More lies, more manipulation. My son is done with you. He's moving on with his life with someone appropriate, someone from our world. You're a coffee shop girl who got ideas above her station. It's time you accepted that and moved on with your life too." "You don't understand," Claire said desperately. "I'm pregnant," Victoria finished, and even through the video, Ruby could hear the venom in her voice. "Yes, I know, you think you're the first woman to try the baby trap. How convenient that you suddenly discover you're pregnant right after being caught in your lies about me being sick. You probably aren't even pregnant. And if you are, well, that's your problem to deal with, not my son's." On the video, Claire's face crumpled. "He deserves to know this is his child." "Is it?" Victoria asked coldly. "Because from what I understand, you've been very friendly with that barista who works the morning shift at your coffee shop. What's his name? David Foster? Yes, I've seen the two of you laughing together, very cozy. Perhaps he's the father. Perhaps you should take your problem to him instead." Ruby gasped. David Foster, the name her mother had given her for her father, was real. He had existed. But he was just a coworker, someone Victoria had used to plant doubt about Ruby's paternity. On the video, Claire stared at Victoria with an expression of complete devastation. "You knew I was coming here tonight. You've been watching me. That's why Jonathan didn't answer. You intercepted the intercom." Victoria smiled, and it was the cruelest smile Ruby had ever seen. "My son is inside right now, packing for a business trip. He's leaving for 6 months to open our European offices. He doesn't know you're here, and he never will. By the time he gets back, you'll be nothing but a distant memory. Now, I suggest you leave before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing and harassment." "Tell him," Claire said, her voice breaking. "When he comes back, tell him I came here. Tell him about the baby, please. He has a right to know." "I'll tell him you came by," Victoria said, already turning to walk away. "And that you tried to trap him with another man's baby. That should ensure he never thinks of you again." On the video, Claire stood at that gate for another 10 minutes after Victoria left, crying and holding whatever she was carrying against her chest. Finally, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the camera's range. That was the last time anyone had seen her before her car was found in the canyon 2 weeks later. Jonathan paused the video, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped the tablet. When he spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. "My mother told me Claire came by that night. She said Claire was drunk and hysterical, that she'd tried to force her way onto the property, that she claimed to be pregnant, but it was obviously a lie to get money. She said Claire had attacked her when she refused to open the gate, that she'd had to call security to escort Claire away. She made Claire sound dangerous and unstable." "But that's not what happened," Ruby said, her own voice shaking. "Your mom lied. My mom was telling the truth, and your mom lied about all of it." "My mother died 2 years after Claire disappeared," Jonathan continued, staring at the frozen image of Claire on the screen. "Cancer, real cancer this time, though part of me wondered if she'd lied about that too. On her deathbed, I asked her if she had any regrets, if there was anything she wanted to confess or apologize for. She said no. She said every decision she'd made was to protect me and secure my future. She died believing she'd done the right thing. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. She knew, Ruby. My mother knew Claire was pregnant with my child, and she sent her away anyway. She let me believe Claire had died, let me mourn her for years, never once telling me I had a daughter out there somewhere. And Claire, your mother, must have seen that video, must have known my mother had poisoned me against her completely. So she staged her death and disappeared, because she thought I'd chosen my mother over her and our unborn child. Ruby's head was spinning with all this information, trying to piece together the puzzle of her mother's past. But how did my mom fake the car crash, and where has she been all these years? Those are questions only your mother can answer, Jonathan said, standing up with sudden determination. And I intend to get those answers right now. You're going to take me to her, Ruby. I need to see Claire. I need to hear the truth from her own mouth. Fear flashed across Ruby's face. What if she doesn't want to see you? What if there's more to the story that we don't know? What if showing up at our apartment scares her or makes her sicker? Then I'll deal with those consequences, Jonathan said firmly. But I've spent 11 years thinking the woman I loved was dead, and I just found out I have a daughter. Nothing on this earth is going to stop me from seeing them both right now. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Marcus, bring the car around. We're going out. Yes, right now. He ended the call and looked at Ruby. Gather your things. We're leaving. Ruby stood on shaky legs, her mind still reeling. Part of her wanted to see her mother and this man reunite, wanted to believe this could be a happy ending where her mom got better and they didn't have to worry about money anymore. But another part of her was terrified. Her mother had spent 11 years building a life away from this man and his world. What if Ruby bringing him back destroyed everything? What if the stress of this revelation made her mother worse instead of better? But looking at Jonathan's face, at the determination and desperate hope burning in his eyes, Ruby knew there was no stopping this. The truth was coming out whether anyone was ready for it or not. Within minutes, a sleek black car pulled up to the front of the mansion. The driver, a man in a neat suit who Jonathan called Marcus, opened the back door. Jonathan gestured for Ruby to get in, then climbed in beside her. The leather seats were softer than any furniture in Ruby's apartment, and the car was so quiet she could barely hear the engine running. Where are we going? Marcus asked. Ruby gave him the address of her apartment building, and she saw Marcus's eyebrows raised slightly in the rearview mirror. It was a rough neighborhood, the kind of place where people like Jonathan Pierce never went unless they were lost. But Jonathan didn't react to the address at all. He just stared out the window as the car began to move, his jaw clenched tight, his hands gripping his knees. The drive from Jonathan's mansion to Ruby's apartment took 30 minutes through evening traffic. Ruby watched the city change outside her window in reverse, the beautiful neighborhoods giving way to middle-class areas, then to working-class districts, and finally to the poor section where Ruby lived. The buildings got older and more rundown, the streets got dirtier, the cars got rustier. By the time they pulled up in front of Ruby's apartment complex, a 5-story brick building with broken windows on the first floor and graffiti covering the walls, Ruby felt embarrassed in a way she never had before. This was her home, the only home she'd ever known, and she'd never been ashamed of it. But seeing it through Jonathan's eyes, seeing him take in the broken front door that didn't lock properly and the trash scattered across the small courtyard, she felt small and poor in a way that made her chest hurt. She's on the 4th floor, Ruby said quietly. The elevator doesn't work, so we have to take the stairs. Jonathan nodded, his face unreadable. They got out of the car and Marcus started to follow, but Jonathan waved him off. Stay with the car, this is something I need to do alone. Ruby led Jonathan into the building, past the broken mailboxes in the lobby, and up the narrow staircase that smelled like old cooking and mildew. Her legs were tired from all the walking she'd done that day, and by the time they reached the 4th floor she was breathing hard. Jonathan, despite being much older, seemed completely unaffected by the climb, though Ruby noticed his eyes scanning every detail of the building with an expression that might have been horror or might have been guilt. They stopped in front of apartment 4C and Ruby pulled her keys from her pocket. Her hand shook as she tried to fit the key in the lock. Wait, Jonathan said, putting his hand over hers. Before we go in, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens in there, whatever your mother says or does, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You didn't ask to be born into this situation. You're innocent in all of this. And no matter what happens, I'm going to make sure you and your mother are taken care of. That's a promise. Ruby nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She turned the key and pushed open the door. The apartment was dark except for a small lamp in the corner. Ruby could see her grandmother Margaret sitting in the old armchair by the window, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes closed like she was praying or maybe just resting. The television was on with the volume turned low, playing some evening news program. And in the bed against the far wall, Ruby could see her mother lying still beneath a faded quilt, her breathing the only sound in the quiet apartment. Margaret's eyes opened at the sound of the door and she started to smile at Ruby, probably expecting her to be alone. But then she saw Jonathan standing behind Ruby in the doorway and her face went completely white. The color drained from her cheeks so fast that Ruby thought she might faint. "Sweet Jesus," Margaret whispered, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. No, this can't be happening." The sound of Margaret's voice, sharp with shock and fear, woke Claire. She stirred beneath the quilt, turning her head toward the door, her eyes still blurry with sleep. For a moment she didn't seem to register what she was seeing. But then her gaze focused on the man standing in her doorway, the man she'd loved and left 11 years ago, the man she'd let believe she was dead, and her entire body went rigid. Claire tried to sit up, but she was too weak, her arms shaking with the effort. Her mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out, like she'd forgotten how to form words. And then, finally, in a voice so broken and terrified that it made Ruby's heart crack in half, she whispered the name she hadn't spoken in over a decade. "Jonathan." The single word hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of 11 years of secrets, lies, loss, and longing. Jonathan stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the woman he'd mourned, seeing her not as the vibrant, healthy person from his memories, but as this fragile, sick version that time and circumstance had created. And in that moment, as 3 generations of women held their breath waiting to see what would happen next, the careful walls that Claire had built to protect her daughter came crashing down. The truth was finally here, standing in their doorway in an expensive suit, with tears streaming down his face. And nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in that small apartment stretched on for what felt like hours, but was really only seconds. Claire stared at Jonathan like he was a ghost who'd walked straight through her locked door, her pale face somehow going even whiter, her hands gripping the edges of her quilt so tightly that her knuckles turned bone white. Margaret had risen from her chair and positioned herself between the bed and the doorway, her elderly body trembling but her stance protective. Like she was ready to fight off this well-dressed stranger even though he was twice her size. And Ruby stood caught between them all, feeling like she'd just set off a bomb and didn't know how to stop the explosion that was coming. "You shouldn't be here," Claire finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with so much fear that it made Ruby's stomach twist into knots. "How did you find us? Ruby, what did you do?" The accusation in her mother's tone stung worse than any slap could have. Ruby felt tears spring to her eyes, her voice coming out small and defensive. "I was just selling candy, Mom. I went to his house and I saw your picture on his wall and I didn't know, I didn't understand. I just asked why he had your photo and then everything came out and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." "Ruby, go to your room," Margaret interrupted, her voice firm despite her shaking. "This is adult business, you don't need to be here for this conversation." "There is no room, Graham," Ruby said quietly, gesturing around the tiny apartment. "This is it, one room for all of us, where am I supposed to go?" Jonathan took a step into the apartment and Margaret immediately moved to block him, her small frame trying to shield Claire from his view. But Jonathan raised his hands in a gesture of peace, his voice coming out gentle despite the emotion clearly tearing him apart. "Please, Margaret, I'm not here to hurt anyone, I just need to understand, I need to hear the truth from Claire's own mouth." "The truth," Margaret spat the word like it was poison. "You want the truth? The truth is that your mother destroyed my daughter's life. The truth is that you chose that horrible woman over Claire, over your own child. The truth is that we've been living in poverty for 11 years while you sat in your mansion and now you have the nerve to show up here demanding answers." "My mother is dead," Jonathan said, his voice cracking. "She's been dead for 9 years and I know what she did. I just saw the security footage from the night Claire came to my gate. I know my mother lied to me, turned me against Claire, sent her away even though she was pregnant. I know all of it now, Margaret. And I am so deeply sorry for every moment of pain that my family caused yours." Margaret's anger seemed to deflate slightly at his words, but her protective stance didn't change. "Sorry doesn't pay medical bills. Sorry doesn't fix 11 years of Claire believing you abandoned her. Sorry doesn't give Ruby back the childhood she should have had." "You're right," Jonathan agreed, and the simple acknowledgement seemed to surprise Margaret. "You're absolutely right, I can't change the past, but I can change what happens from this moment forward. Please just let me talk to her. 5 minutes. If she tells me to leave after that, I'll go and I won't come back, but please give us those 5 minutes. Margaret looked back at Claire, her eyes asking a silent question. Claire's gaze had moved from Jonathan to Ruby, and the expression on her face was so complex that Ruby couldn't begin to untangle all the emotions there. Fear, yes, anger maybe, but also something that looked almost like relief, like a prisoner who'd been carrying a heavy burden for so long that even having it taken away by force was better than continuing to carry it alone. "Let him in, Mom," Claire said softly. "Ruby, come sit with me, you deserve to hear this too. This is your story as much as it is ours." Ruby moved quickly to her mother's bedside, climbing up to sit next to her on the narrow mattress. Claire's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close, and Ruby could feel how thin her mother had become, could feel the bones through her worn nightgown. Up close, Claire looked so much older than she did in that photograph in Jonathan's mansion, her face lined with pain and worry, her hair streaked with premature gray, her body frail from years of untreated illness. Jonathan pulled over the one chair in the apartment that wasn't Margaret's, a wobbly wooden thing that Ruby usually sat in to eat her meals, and positioned it a respectful distance from the bed. He sat down slowly, his expensive suit looking absurdly out of place in their shabby apartment, like a prince who'd accidentally wandered into a peasant's cottage. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Margaret remained standing near the door, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes never leaving Jonathan's face. Ruby sat pressed against her mother's side, feeling Claire's heart beating fast and irregular through her thin nightgown. And Jonathan sat in that wobbly chair, his hands clasped between his knees, staring at the woman he'd loved like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I thought you were dead," Jonathan finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "They found your car at the bottom of Riverside Canyon. Your purse was inside, your ID, your engagement ring. The police said there was a fire, that you must have been thrown from the vehicle and washed away by the river. We searched for weeks. Helicopters, dive teams, search dogs, we looked everywhere. And when we couldn't find you, we held a funeral. I buried an empty casket, Claire. I stood at your grave every week for 3 years and talked to nothing, to nobody, because you were gone." Claire's hand tightened on Ruby's shoulder, her breathing becoming more labored. "I know, I read about the funeral in the newspaper. I stood in the back where no one could see me, wearing sunglasses and a hat, and I watched you cry. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, harder than faking my death, harder than living in hiding, harder than anything. But I had to let you believe I was gone. It was the only way to keep Ruby safe." "Safe from what?" Jonathan demanded, his voice rising with frustration. "Safe from me? I loved you, Claire. I would have protected you both with my life. What could have possibly made you think running away was better than staying with me?" "Your mother," Claire said simply, and those 2 words carried the weight of years of fear and pain. "Your mother made it very clear that she would destroy me and anyone I cared about if I didn't disappear from your life. And I believed her, Jonathan. After everything she'd done, all the ways she'd manipulated and controlled and hurt me, I absolutely believed she was capable of taking my child away from me." Jonathan shook his head violently, like he could physically reject her words. "My mother was cruel and controlling, but she wouldn't have hurt a child. She wouldn't have gone that far." "Wouldn't she?" Claire asked, her voice gaining strength now, anger bleeding into the fear. "The night I came to your gate, the night you saw on that security video, I just come from the doctor. I was 3 months pregnant, Jonathan. 3 months carrying your daughter, terrified and alone because you'd chosen your mother over me. I came to your house to tell you about the baby, to beg you to believe me one more time, to give us one more chance." She paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. "Your mother was waiting for me. She knew I was coming because she'd had people following me. She'd known about the pregnancy before I did because she'd paid someone at the clinic to call her with my test results. She told me that if I tried to tell you about the baby, she would use every resource at her disposal to prove I was an unfit mother. She had a file on me, Jonathan, 3 inches thick. Everything embarrassing or difficult from my past twisted to make me look unstable and dangerous. My father's gambling addiction, my mother's late payments on bills, the time I got drunk at a college party and had to be taken to the hospital, the depression I struggled with when I was 19. She had it all documented and ready to use against me in court." "That's insane," Jonathan said, but his voice wavered because deep down he knew it wasn't. He'd seen his mother destroy business competitors with similar tactics, had watched her compile damaging information on anyone she considered a threat. Why would the woman carrying her grandchild be any different if she saw that child as a threat to her control over her son? "She told me she would take Ruby from me the moment she was born," Claire continued, tears streaming down her face now. "She said she had lawyers on retainer who specialized in custody cases, that she would prove I was a gold-digging drug addict who got pregnant to trap you, that she would paint me as so unfit that I wouldn't even get supervised visitation. She said you would believe her because you'd already chosen her over me once, and you'd do it again when she showed you all her evidence. And then she gave me a choice." "What choice?" Jonathan whispered. "Disappear and keep my baby, or stay and lose her forever." Claire's voice broke completely. She said if I vanished from your life completely, if I let you believe I was dead, she would leave us alone, she would let me raise Ruby in peace. But if I ever tried to contact you, if I ever told you about your daughter, she would make good on every single threat. And I believed her, Jonathan. God help me, I believed every word. The apartment fell silent except for Claire's labored breathing and the quiet sound of Ruby crying against her mother's shoulder. Margaret had her hand over her mouth, her own tears flowing freely. And Jonathan sat frozen, his face a mask of horror and guilt and grief so profound it seemed to age him 10 years in an instant. So you staged your death, he said dully. How? Claire wiped her eyes with a shaking hand. I had help. There was a woman at the women's shelter where I'd been volunteering, someone I'd helped escape from an abusive husband. She was about my size, my coloring. She'd been planning to run away anyway, to start a new life somewhere far away where her husband couldn't find her. I gave her $10,000, everything I'd saved from working at the coffee shop, plus my car, my ID, my engagement ring. I told her to drive to Riverside Canyon, to throw everything over the edge and then disappear. I told her to take my identity and make a new life somewhere safe. And she agreed, Jonathan asked, incredulous. She was desperate, Claire said quietly. Her husband had put her in the hospital twice. She was terrified he'd kill her if she didn't get far enough away. The money and the fake death gave her the head start she needed. As far as I know, she's still out there somewhere living as Claire Davis. I hope she's happy. I hope she found the peace she was looking for. But your purse was in the car, Jonathan said, trying to piece it together. The police found your things. Things can be replaced, Claire said. What matters is that it worked. Everyone believed I was dead. Your mother believed it. You believed it. And that meant Ruby was safe. Jonathan's hands were shaking so badly now that he had to clasp them together to keep them still. My mother died 9 years ago, Claire. 9 years. You've been hiding for 2 years longer than she was even alive. Why didn't you come back then? Why didn't you tell me about Ruby? For the first time since he'd arrived, Claire looked away, unable to meet his eyes. It was Margaret who answered, her voice heavy with sorrow. By the time Victoria died, Claire was already sick. The stress of everything, of living in hiding and working 3 jobs to support a baby while I was too old to help much, it broke her down. She started having heart problems when Ruby was 5. We couldn't afford good healthcare and the free clinics could only do so much. By the time your mother died, Claire was too weak to fight for custody, too sick to prove she could provide for a child. She was afraid that if you found out about Ruby, you'd take her away because Claire couldn't give her the life you could. I would never, Jonathan started, but Margaret cut him off. Wouldn't you? Be honest, Jonathan. If you'd found out 9 years ago that you had a daughter being raised in poverty by a sick woman who faked her own death, what would you have done? Would you have just accepted it and left Ruby here, or would you have used your money and your lawyers to take her somewhere you thought was better? Jonathan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, because she was right. 9 years ago, angry at being deceived, grieving his mother despite her flaws, he absolutely would have fought for custody. He would have told himself it was for Ruby's own good, that she deserved better than this apartment and this poverty. He would have taken her away from the only family she'd ever known and justified it as the right thing to do. I'm not that man anymore, he said quietly. The last 9 years changed me, losing my mother, losing you, building a business empire that felt hollow because I had no one to share it with. I learned that money doesn't matter if you're alone. I learned that control isn't the same as love. I learned too late all the lessons you tried to teach me when we were together. He looked at Ruby, really looked at her, taking in her tangled hair and her faded clothes and her worn shoes with holes in the bottom. You're my daughter. I've missed 10 years of your life. I wasn't there when you were born, when you took your first steps, when you said your first word. I wasn't there for any of it because my mother was a monster and I was too blind to see it. You're here now, Ruby said softly, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the apartment. That's got to count for something, right? Jonathan's face crumpled, and suddenly this powerful billionaire was crying like a child, his shoulders shaking with the force of his grief. I'm so sorry, he sobbed. To all of you, I'm so deeply sorry. I failed you in every possible way. Claire, I should have believed you about my mother. I should have chosen you over her loyalty. Ruby, you should never have had to sell candy on the street to pay for your mother's medical care. Margaret, you should be resting in your old age, not working yourself to death to keep this family afloat. I failed all of you and I don't know how to make it right. Claire reached out slowly, tentatively, and touched Jonathan's hand where it rested on his knee. It was the first physical contact they'd had in 11 years, and the touch seemed to ground them both, seemed to make the impossible situation they found themselves in feel suddenly, startlingly real. You can start by helping us now, Claire said quietly. I'm dying, Jonathan. The doctors say I need surgery, a heart transplant maybe, but it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars that we don't have. Ruby has been trying to raise money selling candy, sweet girl, but it's like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. I've accepted that I'm probably not going to survive this, but Ruby and my mother, they need help. They need someone to take care of them when I'm gone. No, Jonathan said fiercely, standing up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. No, you're not dying, I won't allow it. We're getting you the best doctors in the country, the best surgeons in the world if that's what it takes. Money is not an issue. Whatever you need, whatever it costs, I'll pay for it, all of it. You're not leaving me again, Claire, I just got you back, you're not leaving. Jonathan, Claire said gently, it might be too late. I've been sick for so long, the damage might be irreversible. Then we'll find out, Jonathan said stubbornly. We'll get you examined by specialists, we'll explore every possible option. But we're not giving up without fighting, do you understand? I gave up on you once, believed you were dead and moved on with my life. I'm not making that mistake again. We're fighting this together, all of us. He pulled out his phone and started making calls right there in the apartment, his voice shifting from emotional to commanding in seconds. Dr. Reynolds, this is Jonathan Pierce. I need your team at Presbyterian Hospital prepared for an emergency admission. Yes, right now. Cardiac patient, female, mid-30s, chronic condition requiring immediate evaluation for possible transplant. I'm bringing her in within the hour. Pull whoever you need from whatever they're doing. I don't care about the cost. Just save her life. He made 3 more calls in rapid succession, arranging for an ambulance, alerting the hospital's transplant team, calling in favors from doctors he'd donated millions to over the years. Ruby watched in amazement as this man who'd been a stranger just hours ago moved mountains with a few phone calls, wielding his money and influence like weapons in a war against death itself. The ambulance will be here in 10 minutes, Jonathan said, ending his final call. Claire, you're going to Presbyterian. It's the best cardiac hospital in the state. Dr. Reynolds is the top transplant surgeon in the country. If anyone can help you, he can. Margaret, pack whatever Claire might need for an extended hospital stay. Ruby, you're coming with us. I can't afford Presbyterian, Claire protested weakly. Even one night there costs more than I make in a year. You're not paying, Jonathan said firmly. I am. Consider it 11 years of child support I should have been providing all along. Consider it an apology for my mother's cruelty. Consider it whatever you want, but you're going to that hospital and you're getting treatment. That's not negotiable. Margaret was already moving, pulling clothes from a battered dresser and stuffing them into an old duffel bag. Her hands were shaking, but her face showed determination mixed with cautious hope. Ruby jumped up to help, gathering her mother's medications from the bathroom cabinet, trying not to think about how many of the bottles were empty because they couldn't afford refills. While they packed, Jonathan knelt beside Claire's bed, taking her hand in both of his. I know you're scared, I know you don't trust me yet, and you have every reason not to, but I'm begging you to let me help. Not because I'm trying to take control or because I think money solves everything, but because I love you, Claire. I never stopped loving you, and I'm not going to stand by and watch you die when I have the resources to save you. What if the doctors can't save me? Claire asked, her voice small and frightened. What happens to Ruby then? Then Ruby comes to live with me, Jonathan said without hesitation. And Margaret too, if she'll have me. I have more than enough space, more than enough resources. You don't have to worry about them, Claire. No matter what happens, they'll be taken care of. That's my solemn promise to you. Claire's eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time they weren't tears of fear or grief. They were tears of relief, the kind that came when a weight you'd been carrying for so long was finally lifted from your shoulders. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll go to the hospital, I'll let you help, but Jonathan, you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't try to take Ruby away from me while I'm getting treatment. Promise me that whatever happens between us, you'll let her choose where she wants to be and who she wants to be with. She's not a possession to be fought over. She's a person and she deserves a say in her own life. Jonathan looked at Ruby, at this brave girl who'd walked up to a stranger's mansion selling candy to save her mother, who'd carried burdens no child should have to carry, who'd kept going even when everything seemed hopeless. I promise, he said, and this time when he made a promise, Ruby believed he would keep it. The ambulance arrived exactly when Jonathan said it would, its lights flashing red and blue through the apartment's grimy windows. The paramedics came up the stairs with a stretcher and portable monitors, moving with efficient professionalism as they transferred Claire from her bed to the stretcher. They took her vital signs and started an IV, their faces carefully neutral but their quick movements suggesting concern about what they were seeing. Ruby held her mother's hand as they carried her down the 4 flights of stairs, refusing to let go even when the paramedics said she needed to step back. Margaret followed close behind, clutching the packed duffel bag like a lifeline. And Jonathan walked beside them all, his phone pressed to his ear as he made more calls, arranging things Ruby didn't fully understand but knew were important. The ambulance ride to Presbyterian Hospital took 20 minutes through evening traffic, sirens wailing to clear the way. Ruby sat in the back with her mother while Margaret and Jonathan followed in his car. Claire kept drifting in and out of consciousness, her breathing labored despite the oxygen mask the paramedics had placed over her face. Every time her eyes opened, they searched for Ruby, and Ruby squeezed her hand to let her know she was there. "I'm scared, baby," Claire whispered at one point when the paramedics were focused on their equipment. "I know, Mama," Ruby whispered back, using the name she only called her mother when she was very little or very scared. "But that man, Jonathan, he seems like he really wants to help, and if he can help, we should let him. We've been brave and strong on our own for so long. Maybe it's okay to let someone else be strong for us for a little while." Claire's eyes filled with tears again, but she nodded, squeezing Ruby's hand with what little strength she had left. Presbyterian Hospital was unlike anything Ruby had ever seen. The building was massive, all glass and steel and modern architecture, with a grand entrance flanked by perfect landscaping and a circular drive where expensive cars dropped off well-dressed visitors. The emergency department entrance where the ambulance pulled up was just as impressive, with automatic doors that swished open silently and a bright, clean waiting area that smelled like antiseptic and fresh flowers instead of the urine and desperation smell that had permeated the free clinic where Claire usually went. Dr. Reynolds was waiting for them at the entrance, a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes, wearing surgical scrubs and an air of calm competence. He'd clearly been briefed on the situation because he took one look at Claire and started barking orders to the team of nurses and residents that had assembled around him. "Get her to cardiac ICU, stat. I want a full workup echocardiogram, stress test if she's stable enough, complete blood panel, page cardiology and get the transplant coordinator down here. Move." The team swept Claire away so fast that Ruby barely had time to let go of her hand. She stood in the middle of that pristine emergency room, her worn clothes and dirty sneakers making her feel like an imposter in this place of wealth and healing, and watched her mother disappear through automatic doors that read authorized personnel only. Jonathan appeared beside her with Margaret just behind him, both of them breathing hard from running from the parking garage. "Where did they take her?" Jonathan demanded. "Cardiac ICU," Ruby said numbly. "Dr. Reynolds said they're doing tests." Jonathan nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Then we wait. Come on, they'll have a private waiting room we can use." He led them through the hospital, moving with the confidence of someone who'd been here before, probably visiting other wealthy patients or making his substantial donations. They ended up in a small but comfortable waiting room on the cardiac floor, with soft chairs and warm lighting and a coffee machine that actually worked. It was nothing like the crowded, uncomfortable waiting areas Ruby had spent time in at the free clinic, where you sat shoulder to shoulder with sick people for hours and hoped you didn't catch whatever they had. A nurse brought them coffee and juice and promised to update them the moment there was any news. Then they were alone, three people who'd been strangers a few hours ago but were now bound together by love for the same woman and fear for her life. Margaret sank into one of the chairs with a heavy sigh, looking every one of her 72 years. Ruby sat beside her grandmother, leaning against her side, suddenly exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the day. And Jonathan paced the small room like a caged animal, his expensive shoes making soft squeaking sounds on the linoleum floor, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Tell me about her," Jonathan said suddenly, stopping his packing to look at Ruby. "Tell me about these last 11 years. What was she like as a mother? What did I miss?" Ruby thought about all the memories, good and bad, that made up her childhood with Claire. "She was the best mom," Ruby said quietly. "Even when she was sick, even when we didn't have money for food or electricity got shut off because we couldn't pay the bill, she always made sure I knew I was loved. She read to me every night, even on the days when she could barely keep her eyes open. She helped me with my homework until I had to drop out of school. She made holidays special even when we couldn't afford presents, making decorations from newspaper and singing songs and telling stories about when she was young." Ruby's voice caught with emotion, but she pushed forward. "She worked so hard, Jonathan. Before she got too sick, she worked 3 jobs to keep us fed and housed. She cleaned office buildings at night, waited tables during the day, did people's laundry on weekends. She never complained, never made me feel bad about how poor we were. She said being poor wasn't shameful, that what mattered was how we treated people and whether we did our best with what we had. She taught me to be kind and brave and to never give up even when things seemed impossible. She sounds remarkable, Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. She is remarkable, Margaret added, emphasizing the present tense. My daughter has more strength in her little finger than most people have in their whole body. She survived your mother's cruelty. She gave up everything to protect her child. She built a life from nothing and raised a beautiful, smart, compassionate daughter despite having every reason to give up. Claire Davis is a warrior and she's going to survive this too. She has to. The hours crawled by with painful slowness. Nurses came and went, giving vague updates that Claire was stable, that they were running tests, that Dr. Reynolds would be out to speak with them when he had more information. Jonathan made phone calls, arranging for Margaret and Ruby's apartment to be professionally cleaned and secured, having food delivered to the hospital for them, dealing with the 1,000 practical details that came with an emergency hospitalization. Ruby dozed fitfully in her chair, her head on Margaret's shoulder, drifting in and out of dreams where her mother was healthy and smiling like in that photograph, where they lived in a nice house with heat that worked and food in the refrigerator. Where Ruby could go to school and have friends and be a normal kid instead of a 10-year-old trying to sell candy to pay impossible medical bills. It was nearly midnight when Dr. Reynolds finally emerged from the restricted area, still in his scrubs but now with exhaustion lining his kind face. Jonathan jumped up immediately, and the movement woke Ruby, who blinked groggily and tried to focus on the doctor's expression, trying to read whether the news was good or bad. She's stable for now, Dr. Reynolds said without preamble, and the collective sigh of relief in that small room was audible. But I'm not going to lie to you, the situation is serious. Claire has advanced cardiomyopathy, which means her heart muscle is severely weakened and struggling to pump blood effectively. She also has significant valve damage and early signs of heart failure. If she'd waited much longer to seek treatment, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. Can you fix it? Jonathan asked, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. Dr. Reynolds gestured for them all to sit, then took a seat himself, his posture suggesting this was going to be a long and complicated explanation. Surgery can help, but it's not a simple fix. She needs valve replacement surgery immediately to address the most acute issues. That will buy us time and improve her quality of life significantly. But long-term, we're looking at the possibility of a heart transplant. Her heart is too damaged to fully recover on its own, and even with the valve replacement, she'll likely continue to decline without a transplant. Then put her on the transplant list, Jonathan said immediately. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, do it. It's not that simple, Dr. Reynolds said gently. The transplant list has strict requirements. Patients need to prove they can afford the surgery, the anti-rejection medications, and the intensive follow-up care that comes after. Insurance companies look at income, living situation, support system. Claire has been living in poverty, uninsured, with untreated illness for years. On paper, she's not an ideal transplant candidate. Then we change the paper, Jonathan said fiercely. I'll pay for everything, all of it, whatever she needs for the rest of her life. I'll hire private nurses, buy a house equipped for her recovery, whatever the transplant board requires. Money is not a barrier here, doctor. My daughter is not losing her mother because of bureaucratic red tape. Dr. Reynolds studied Jonathan for a long moment, his experienced eyes seeing something that made him nod slowly. I believe you mean that, and with the proper financial backing and support system in place, I can present Claire as a viable candidate. But Jonathan, you need to understand something. Even with perfect conditions, heart transplants are complicated. The waitlist can be years long, patients die waiting, and even if we find her a heart, there are no guarantees. Rejection, infection, complications, the survival rate is good, but it's not perfect. What are her chances without the transplant? Margaret asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Reynolds looked at her with sympathy. Without intervention, given the progression of her disease, Claire has maybe 6 months. With the valve replacement surgery, we can extend that to 2, maybe 3 years of relatively good quality life. But without a transplant, eventually the outcome is the same. I'm sorry, I know that's not what you wanted to hear. The room fell into heavy silence. 6 months. Ruby's brain couldn't quite process what that meant. 6 months was nothing. 6 months was summer vacation and then a little bit of fall. 6 months was not enough time for anything, certainly not enough time to have her mother around. Do the surgery, Ruby said suddenly, her voice small but determined. The valve thing, do it now, give her more time and then we'll figure out the rest, but we need more time. Dr. Reynolds looked at Ruby with something like admiration. You're a brave young lady, your mother must be very proud of you. He turned back to Jonathan. I can schedule the valve replacement for tomorrow morning. It's a 6-hour surgery, complicated but routine for my team. The recovery will be several weeks and she'll need intensive cardiac rehabilitation after, but if all goes well, she should regain significant functionality. Do it, Jonathan said. Whatever you need, you have my full authorization and financial backing. Dr. Reynolds stood, nodding. I'll have the surgical coordinator draw up the consent forms and cost estimates. Jonathan, I'll need you to sign financial guarantees. And Margaret, as next of kin, Claire will need to sign surgical consent when she's lucid enough. You can see her briefly now if you'd like, but she's heavily sedated and may not be very responsive. He led them through the restricted doors and down a quiet hallway to the cardiac ICU. The unit was dimly lit for nighttime, with nurses moving quietly between rooms, checking monitors and adjusting IV drips. Claire's room was at the end of the hall, a private space with huge windows overlooking the city lights and enough medical equipment to stock a small clinic. Claire lay in the hospital bed looking tiny and fragile beneath white sheets, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face pale but peaceful in sleep. Machines beeped steadily around her, monitoring her heart rate and oxygen levels and blood pressure. IV lines ran into both arms, delivering fluids and medications. Despite all the technology keeping her alive, she looked more like herself than Ruby had seen in months, like the sedation had erased the lines of constant pain from her face. Ruby approached the bed slowly, taking her mother's hand carefully to avoid disturbing the IV. I'm here, Mama, she whispered. We're all here, and you're going to be okay. The doctors are going to fix your heart and Jonathan is paying for everything and we don't have to be scared anymore, you just have to rest and get better. Claire's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and drowsy from the sedation. Her gaze found Ruby's face and she smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. My brave girl, she murmured, always so brave. I learned from the best, Ruby said, squeezing her hand gently. Claire's eyes moved to where Jonathan stood at the foot of the bed, his hands gripping the rail like he needed something to hold onto. Jonathan, she whispered, you came. Of course I came, he said, his voice breaking. I never stopped loving you, Claire, not for one single day in 11 years. I'm so sorry for everything. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry my mother hurt you. I'm sorry I wasn't there when Ruby was born. I'm sorry for all of it, but I'm here now and I'm not leaving again. I'm going to make sure you get better, whatever it takes. A single tear rolled down Claire's cheek. I'm sorry too, she whispered. For running, for letting you think I was dead, for depriving you of knowing your daughter. I was scared and I made choices that hurt everyone, but I never stopped loving you either, not even once. The machines around the bed continued their steady beeping, marking out the rhythm of Claire's damaged heart. But in that quiet hospital room, surrounded by her mother and daughter and the man she'd loved and lost and found again, Claire's face held something it hadn't held in 11 long years. Hope. Dr. Reynolds gently ushered them out a few minutes later, reminding them that Claire needed rest before her surgery in the morning. As they walked back to the waiting room, Ruby's mind was spinning with everything that had happened, everything that had changed in just one impossible day. This morning, she'd been a poor girl selling candy to pay medical bills. Now she was the daughter of a billionaire, her mother was getting life-saving surgery, and her entire world had been turned upside down and inside out. Jonathan arranged for Margaret and Ruby to stay in one of the hospital's family suites, a comfortable room with real beds and a private bathroom and a small kitchen area. It was nicer than their apartment, and Ruby felt a pang of something like shame that a hospital room was an upgrade from where they lived. Try to get some sleep, Jonathan said, hovering in the doorway like he didn't want to leave them alone. The surgery starts at 7 in the morning. I'll be here before that and we'll wait together. Where are you going? Ruby asked, suddenly not wanting this strange new father to disappear, afraid that if he left she'd wake up and find out this had all been a dream, that her mother was still dying in their shabby apartment and nothing had changed at all. I'm going to stay in the waiting room, Jonathan said. I have some calls to make, arrangements to finalize. I'll be right down the hall if you need anything. You should rest too, Margaret said, her voice still cautious around this man who'd been her daughter's love and then her enemy and now was something undefined. You look exhausted. I haven't slept properly in 11 years, Jonathan said with a tired smile. One more night won't make a difference. Besides, I need to make sure everything is perfect for Claire's surgery. I'm contacting the best cardiac rehabilitation centers, arranging for post-surgical care, setting up consultations with transplant specialists at 3 other hospitals for second opinions. There's too much to do to sleep. He left them then, and Ruby heard his footsteps echoing down the hallway, followed by his voice speaking urgently into his phone. Even from here, she could hear the determination in his tone, the way he commanded and expected obedience, the power that came with having unlimited resources to throw at a problem. Margaret helped Ruby wash up in the private bathroom, using the fancy soaps and lotions the hospital provided. They changed into clean hospital gowns that a nurse had brought, since neither of them had packed clothes for themselves in the rush to gather Claire's things. Then they climbed into the two beds, turning off the lights but leaving the bathroom light on with the door cracked, just like they did at home when Ruby was scared. "Graham," Ruby whispered into the darkness, "is this real, or am I going to wake up and find out I dreamed it all?" "It's real, baby girl," Margaret said from the other bed. "As real as anything I've ever seen. That man loves your mother, always has, and I think, despite everything, he's going to love you too once he gets to know you." "Are you scared?" Ruby asked, "of everything changing so fast?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Terrified," she admitted finally. "Change is always scary, even when it's good change. We've been on our own for so long, just the three of us against the world. Now suddenly there's this other person with money and power and the ability to change our lives completely. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff not knowing if there's solid ground below or just more falling." "But Mom loves him," Ruby said. "I saw it in her eyes when she looked at him. Even after everything, even after 11 years, she still loves him." "Love doesn't always mean things will work out," Margaret said gently. "Your mama and Jonathan have a lot to work through. 11 years of hurt and lies and misunderstanding doesn't disappear just because they're in the same room again. They're going to have to learn to trust each other, to forgive each other, to build something new from the broken pieces of what they had. That takes time and effort and a lot of difficult conversations." "But they'll try, right?" Ruby asked, her voice small and hopeful. "They'll try to make it work." "I think they will," Margaret said. "For you, if nothing else, you deserve to know your father. Ruby, you deserve to have both parents in your life. And if that man is even half as determined about being your father as he is about saving Claire's life, then yes, I think they'll try very hard to make this work." Ruby lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling where the bathroom light cast strange shadows. Her mind kept replaying the day's events like a movie, from the moment she pressed that intercom button at Jonathan's gate to watching her mother smile in that hospital bed. So much had changed so quickly that it didn't feel possible, didn't feel like something that could happen in real life. But it had happened, and tomorrow her mother would have surgery that might save her life or might not. And after that, nothing would ever be the same again, for better or worse. Ruby finally fell asleep sometime after midnight, her dreams a confused tangle of mansions and medical equipment, of her mother's photograph on a wall and Jonathan's tears on the marble floor, of hope and fear and the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, things might actually turn out okay. She woke to someone gently shaking her shoulder. Blinking groggily, Ruby saw a nurse standing beside her bed, a kind-faced woman with graying hair and a gentle smile. "I'm sorry to wake you, sweetie," the nurse said softly, "but it's 6:30 and your mother is being prepped for surgery. Dr. Reynolds thought you might want to see her before they take her to the operating room." Ruby was out of bed instantly, not caring that she was still in a hospital gown or that her hair was a tangled mess. Margaret was already up and dressed in the same clothes from yesterday, looking worn but determined. They followed the nurse back to the ICU, where they found Claire awake and surprisingly alert despite the early hour. Jonathan was already there, sitting in the chair beside Claire's bed, holding her hand. He looked like he hadn't slept at all, his expensive suit rumpled and his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were focused completely on Claire like nothing else in the world mattered. "There's my girl," Claire said when she saw Ruby, her voice stronger than it had been last night. "Come here, baby." Ruby climbed carefully onto the bed, curling up against her mother's side like she used to do when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. Claire's arm came around her, and despite all the tubes and wires, it felt safe and right, like home always felt no matter where they were. "I'm scared, Mama," Ruby whispered. "Me too," Claire admitted. "But Dr. Reynolds is a good surgeon, one of the best, and I have so many reasons to fight to come back from this surgery. I have you, my beautiful, brave daughter. I have my mother who's been my rock through everything. And I have Jonathan, who came back into my life like a miracle when I needed him most. With all that to fight for, how can I possibly give up?" "You better not give up," Ruby said fiercely. "Because I just found out I have a dad and you owe me like 10 years of birthday parties and Christmases with both parents. You can't leave now when things are finally getting good." Claire laughed, though it came out wet with tears. "I'll do my best, baby, I promise." The surgical team arrived then, a group of nurses and an anesthesiologist and Dr. Reynolds himself, all moving with practiced efficiency as they prepared to transport Claire to the operating room. They unhooked her from the room's monitors and switched her to portable equipment, checked her IV lines, reviewed her charts one final time. "It's time," Dr. Reynolds said gently. "We need to get started." Ruby climbed off the bed reluctantly, her hand still clutching her mother's. Margaret moved to the other side, leaning down to kiss Claire's forehead. "You come back to us, you hear me?" Margaret said, her voice shaking. "I didn't raise you to be a quitter. You fight with everything you have and you come back." "I will, Mama," Claire said, reverting to the name she'd called Margaret when she was young. "I love you. Thank you for everything you've done for Ruby and me. Thank you for never giving up on us." Then Jonathan leaned down, his hand cupping Claire's face gently, his thumb brushing away the tears on her cheek. "I love you," he said simply. "I've loved you for 15 years, through losing you and mourning you and finding you again. I'm going to be right here when you wake up. We have so much lost time to make up for, so many conversations to have, so many years to build together. So you fight, Claire Davis. You fight like hell because I'm not losing you again." Claire reached up and pulled him down, pressing a kiss to his lips that was soft and sweet and filled with 11 years of longing. "I love you too," she whispered against his mouth. "I never stopped, not once." Then the surgical team was wheeling her bed toward the door, and they all had to step back, had to let her go. Ruby watched her mother disappear down the hallway toward the operating rooms, watched until the doors swung shut and she was gone, and felt like her heart was being pulled out of her chest and carried away with her. Jonathan's hand landed on Ruby's shoulder, warm and steady and comforting in a way she didn't expect. "She's strong," he said quietly. "Stronger than anyone I've ever known. She survived 11 years of hell that would have broken most people. She's going to survive this too." "You can't know that," Ruby said, her voice small and scared. "The doctor said there are no guarantees." "No, I can't know it for certain," Jonathan admitted. "But I choose to believe it anyway. Sometimes believing is all we have, Ruby. Sometimes faith is the only thing that gets us through the impossible moments." They went back to the waiting room then, the same one from last night, and settled in for what Dr. Reynolds had warned would be a 6-hour surgery. Jonathan had arranged for breakfast to be brought up from the hospital's executive dining room, actual hot food instead of vending machine snacks, but none of them had much appetite. They picked at eggs and toast and fruit, forcing down enough to keep their energy up, but everything tasted like cardboard in Ruby's mouth. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Jonathan worked on his laptop, though Ruby noticed he kept closing it and then opening it again like he couldn't focus. Margaret knitted, her needles clicking in a steady rhythm that was oddly soothing, creating a soft blue blanket that she said would be for Claire's recovery. And Ruby sat curled up in a chair by the window, watching the city wake up below, watching people go about their normal Friday morning routines, completely unaware that up here on the cardiac floor, Ruby's entire world hung in the balance. Around hour 3, Ruby finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since yesterday. "Jonathan, can I call you that, or should I call you Dad?" Jonathan looked up from his laptop. Surprise and something that looked like hope flashing across his face. "You can call me whatever feels comfortable to you. I know I haven't earned the title of Dad yet. That's something I'll have to work toward." "Tell me about when you and Mom were together," Ruby said. "I want to know what she was like before everything went wrong. I want to know the version of her that lived in your world." Jonathan closed his laptop completely and leaned back in his chair, his eyes getting that faraway look people get when they're remembering better times. "Your mother was like sunshine," he said softly. "That's the only way I can describe her. She lit up every room she walked into, made everyone around her feel special and seen. She had this laugh that was completely uninhibited, this full-body laugh that made other people start laughing even if they didn't know what was funny. She was terrible at cooking but tried anyway, making these elaborate disasters that we'd end up ordering pizza to replace, but we'd laugh the whole time about her latest culinary catastrophe." He smiled, lost in the memory. "She loved old movies, the black and white ones from the 40s and 50s. We'd stay up late watching them and she'd quote all the famous lines along with the actors. She wanted to be a teacher, specifically for underprivileged kids, because she understood what it was like to grow up with nothing, and she wanted to make sure those kids had someone who believed in them. She volunteered everywhere, at soup kitchens and women's shelters and community centers. She said that just because we didn't have much money yet didn't mean we couldn't give our time." "She still does that," Ruby said quietly. "Even when she got sick, she'd spend whatever energy she had helping people at the community center. She'd tutor kids who were struggling in school, help people fill out job applications, listen to anyone who needed someone to talk to. She said being poor taught her that kindness costs nothing but means everything. "That's the Claire I fell in love with," Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "The woman who saw the best in everyone, who gave everything she had even when she had almost nothing. I was building a business and becoming consumed by ambition and competition, getting harder and more cynical with every business deal. But Claire kept me human. She reminded me why I was working so hard in the first place, not just to make money but to make a difference. When I lost her, when I thought she died, I lost that part of myself too. I became exactly what my mother wanted, all business and no heart. It took me years to realize what I'd lost." "But you can get it back now," Ruby said hopefully. "Now that Mom's alive, now that you found each other again, maybe you can both be the people you were meant to be."